In the year 2040, humanity believed it had created the most important piece of technology in its entire history: a ship. Its name was the Event Horizon, and it had not been built to explore space in the conventional way. It was not designed to slowly travel the distance between the stars. Its purpose was far more ambitious, more dangerous, and in a certain sense, more arrogant, because the Event Horizon was meant to bend space-time. Its gravity drive was an experimental machine capable of generating an artificial singularity. In theory, that singularity could connect two distant points in the cosmos, creating an instant tunnel between them. Because of this, the ship would not travel faster than light. It would do something far more radical. It would take a shortcut through the very structure of the universe. To its creators, this was seen as progress. To humanity, it was the beginning of a new era in space exploration. But no one understood that they were not really building a ship. They were building a portal. And that portal did not only connect two regions of space, it could also touch a place that did not belong to the known universe. A place where the laws of physics, time, identity, and death worked in a different way. The man behind that technology was Dr. William Weir, a brilliant, obsessive, and deeply broken scientist. Weir was a man who had dedicated his life to the gravity drive, but that same commitment had isolated him from everything else that mattered to him. As his creation advanced, his marriage deteriorated. His wife, Claire, sank into a loneliness that he failed to see, or refused to see, until it was already too late, when she took her own life. When Claire died, Weir did not process the loss like an ordinary person. He did not allow himself to stop. He did not allow himself to feel. He simply returned to work, as if science could cover the emptiness her absence had left behind. But the guilt remained inside him, like a buried virus, silent and waiting for the exact moment to be used against him. Because the Event Horizon would not only feed on human technology, it would also feed on the psychological wounds of its creator and its crew. The ship's original crew was selected to carry out the first jump toward Proxima Centauri. Captain John Kilpack would be the one in charge of leading the mission. He was a disciplined, intelligent man, used to carrying great responsibilities. But his authority did not come only from military training. It came from a childhood marked by extreme discipline and violence. His father had raised him harshly, hitting him whenever he made a mistake, and forcing him to repeat things until every failure was erased. Kilpack learned from childhood that failure meant pain. That lesson would turn him into a strong captain, but also into a man haunted by the idea that he might not be able to protect those who depended on him. Alongside him was Jennifer Kwan, an expert in quantum physics, and one of the minds most necessary to understand the jump the Event Horizon was about to make. Kwan carried a different kind of wound inside her. She and her sister Emma had once shared a bond that seemed inseparable. Emma's death and the distance between them had left her with a sense of emptiness that was difficult to explain. For Kwan, science was a way to bring order to the world, but her own life was marked by a broken connection, by the idea that two people could remain linked even when one of them was no longer there. There was also Sarah Tsang, a woman who had escaped an abusive marriage. Her husband Ben had controlled her, beaten her, and reduced her for years to an existence ruled by fear. Sarah had managed to survive, but she had not come out of it mentally intact. As happens with many victims of abuse, a part of her remained trapped in that past, wondering whether she had truly escaped or whether fear had only changed its form. Chief Engineer Yusuf Quinn was the man of machines. He had grown up seeking refuge in systems, circuits, and mechanisms. While the emotional world of his childhood became chaotic, he found calm in the things he could dismantle and repair. For Quinn, every problem had to have a cause and a solution. That faith in technical logic would be destroyed when he discovered that the gravity drive was not broken. It was working exactly as it was supposed to. Peter Ajay, another key member of the crew, carried a terminal illness. Before the mission, he had been diagnosed with cancer, and from that moment on, death had become a constant presence for him. Peter did not want to die locked inside a hospital room. He wanted his final days to mean something. He wanted to witness something so immense that it could justify the weight of an entire life. Nia Atwell, the communications officer, initially seemed to be one of the most stable people in the group, but her role would become tragic because she was the one who received the signal that revealed the secret of Devlin Connors. the navigator. Connors had caused the death of a child in a traffic accident and had fled from the consequences. His entire life, he had learned to escape, to move, to dodge physical and moral blows. But in space, inside a ship built to pierce reality itself, his past finally caught up with him. Because of this, even before the event horizon reached Hell, violence had already stained its corridors. When Nia discovered the arrest warrant against Connors, he reacted with fear. He did not face the truth. He did not take responsibility for his actions. He did what he had done all his life. He tried to remove the obstacle. And with that decision, the event horizon received its first human death before it had even fully crossed the threshold. This is important because it reveals the true nature of the story. Evil did not appear only when the engine was activated. It was already present within the crew. Not as a supernatural force, but as guilt, abuse, trauma, cowardice, pride, pain, and secrets. The ship only opened the door. Nia's death may have been the spiritual key. After this, the jump finally came. The gravity drive activated. The rings began to move around the core, the artificial singularity formed, and the event horizon disappeared from the known universe. To outside observers, the ship simply vanished. But for the crew, it was not a disappearance. It was a fall. The event horizon did not reach Proxima Centauri. It reached a dimension impossible for the human mind to understand. A red, organic, monstrous realm. A space where there were no stars, no vacuum, and no silence. Everything looked like flesh, eyes, jaws, shadows, screams, and living organic structures. The ship floated in that place like a human object trapped inside the body of something gigantic. Technically, it was not hell in a conventional religious sense, but the word hell became inevitable because there was no other way to describe it. Their reality did not follow the universal rules humans know. Time bent, death lost its stability, memories could take physical form, guilt could become creatures, and the ship began to change. At this point, the event horizon stopped being just a spaceship and became a bridge, a structure contaminated by the logic of that nightmarish dimension. Its corridors, its doors, its engine, and its architecture became impregnated with a presence that did not attack directly at first. It observed, it listened, and it learned, as if the ship were studying its own crew. To Connors, it returned the image of the child he had run over, not as a memory but as a physical accusation, a mutilated figure that turned his crime into something impossible to deny. Connors had spent his life running away, but there was nowhere to escape there. Hell was not chasing him from the outside. It was tormenting him from within. It led Quinn to the gravity drive. There he discovered that the core was no longer just a piece of technology. Now it was an altar, an eye opened toward the dimension of chaos. And from that opening appeared an entity that adopted the name Paimon, presenting itself as the king of hell. It did not matter whether it was literally the devil of Christian tradition or whether it only used that name because the human mind needed to name the impossible. What mattered was that it had will, intelligence, and more importantly, hunger. Paimon understood Quinn's fear perfectly. He knew the engineer needed to believe that everything could be repaired. That is why he revealed the cruelest truth to him. The engine had not failed. It had worked exactly as it was supposed to, and it had taken the ship exactly where it was meant to go. For Quinn, this destroyed every illusion of control he had, because the machine was not actually damaged. What was damaged was the world he believed he understood. With this revelation, Paimon broke him, and then turned him into his tool. This self-proclaimed king of hell also created a horrible creature by tearing a mass of flesh from his own body. At first it seemed like a living extension of his will, but soon it began absorbing the crew members of the event horizon, integrating their bodies and faces into a single monstrous form and making it grow. It left behind the image of a being resembling a large dog, formed from the victims it consumed, whose screams remained trapped inside its flesh. Peter Adjei faced one of them. His illness had already taught him that death could approach slowly, silently, and without asking permission. That is why, when that creature appeared on the ship, Peter did not react only with panic. He understood that he could not be cured, but he could decide how to use the time he had left. He lured the creature toward an airlock and tried to expel it into the void. And when he realized that he could not save himself and save the others at the same time, he chose to stay behind. Peter died dragging the monster out of the ship. He gave his life not to defeat hell, because no one truly could, but to deny it one more victim. Showing us that, in a story where death seemed to have no meaning, his sacrifice was one of the last truly human acts of the original crew. Meanwhile, Kilpack was sinking into his own torment. The ship did not attack him first with monsters, but with memories. It took him back to the piano of his childhood, to the hands beaten by his father, to the order to repeat again and again until he made no mistakes. Then it showed him his dead crew: Nia, Yusuf, Peter. All of them turned into proof of his failure. For Kilpack, this was devastating because his identity was built on responsibility. He was the captain. He had to protect them. He had authorized the jump, and he had to bring them home. But this time he could not. The entity mixed that pain with memories of Jeremy, the man who had once represented a different life for Kilpack. A life where he could love, read, think, and exist without the violence imposed by his father. But even that memory was contaminated, because this hell respected nothing, and it took the most intimate parts of its victims' minds and turned them into instruments of torture. Even so, Kilpack understood something essential. The event horizon must not return. If the ship returned to Earth, it would not return alone. It would bring with it the dimension that had transformed it. It would carry that metaphysical infection into the human universe. That is why, before he died, Kilpack recorded a warning. They must not rescue the ship. They must not follow them, and under no circumstances should they bring them back. His message, broken by interference and horror, would be heard years later as a distorted phrase in Latin: "Save yourself from hell." But the warning came too late for him. Kilpack died on the bridge, with his eyes torn out, becoming one of the images that the rescue crew would later find. After his death, the last ones to maintain a clear mission were Jennifer Kwan and Sarah San. They understood that the only option was to destroy the gravity drive. There was no way to recover the ship. There was no way to save the project. The event horizon had to be destroyed before it could return to Earth. But the dimension and Paimon would not allow that to happen. To Sarah, it returned Ben, her abusive husband, bringing him back as a tangible presence, a physical form of the fear that had dominated her for years. The cruelest part was that Sarah had already killed him several times inside that realm, but death did not work there as it did in the real world. Ben kept coming back, because hell knew that as long as she believed she still belonged to him, it could continue controlling her. But Sarah began to see the truth. Ben was not her destiny. He was just another form of manipulation. The event horizon used him because it knew her wound, and Sarah decided not to obey that fear anymore. Kwan, for her part, faced the pain of losing her sister, and the concept that best defined her own life: quantum entanglement. Two particles could remain connected even when separated by impossible distances. And on the event horizon, that idea was no longer only physical, it was also emotional. People remained linked by love, guilt, trauma, broken promises, and words that were never spoken. The ship used those bonds to open cracks, but Kwan also used her knowledge to resist. Together with Sarah, she placed explosive charges. The plan was to destroy the engine, split the ship apart, and prevent Hell from having a direct path to Earth. For them, the plan was no longer about saving themselves. It was about preventing this dimension from reaching ours, a desperate way to destroy the door before it fully opened. But once again, Paimon tried to stop them. He used Quinn, he used visions, he used his creatures, and above all, he used guilt. But Sarah and Kwan managed to activate the explosives. The event horizon began to break apart. The engine section was separated, the hull tore open, and the ship disappeared into that realm of chaos. However, inside that dimension, destruction did not work the way it did in the normal universe. The explosion did not completely end the event horizon, because Paimon had already bound his will to the gravity core and to the ship's own structure. The remains were left floating in the realm of chaos as fragments of metal, flesh, and energy. But there, matter could be deformed, reused, and rebuilt. For 7 years, Paimon reassembled the ship piece by piece, not the way an engineer would repair a machine, but the way an entity reconstructs a possessed body. The hole closed again, the corridors recovered their shape, the systems reactivated irregularly, and the gravity drive was restored enough to open a breach once more. But the event horizon that would return later was not the same one that had disappeared. It was a corrupted version, rebuilt from hell itself, transformed into a physical extension of Paimon, and prepared to lure new victims to the other side. During that time, no one knew the truth. Officially, the event horizon had exploded or disappeared because of a technical failure. But in reality, the ship had been dragged beyond the known universe, mutilated by its own crew, and contaminated by a dimension that was still trying to force its way into ours. On Earth, Weir remained marked by Claire's death. Guilt had hollowed him out mentally and emotionally. The project that was supposed to be his great triumph had become a deep wound. But something of the event horizon survived, a kind of signal or influence that promised him something. Claire's image began to call to him. It made him believe she was on the ship. It made him believe he could recover her. And that was the perfect trap, because the entity within the ship only needed to offer him what he desired most, a second chance with the woman he could not save. So when the ship reappeared in 2047 near Neptune, it did not return in ruins. It returned as bait. The rescue ship Lewis and Clark, commanded by Captain Miller, was sent to investigate the reappearance of the event horizon. Miller was not like Weir. He did not see that ship as a masterpiece, or as a scientific opportunity, or as a way to reach something greater. He was a practical captain, used to making difficult decisions, but also a man marked by his own guilt. Years earlier, during a fire, he had been forced to abandon a crewmate named Korik in order to save the rest of his crew. It was a necessary decision, but not a clean one. Since then, the image of Korik burning had stayed with him like a wound that never fully healed. Traveling with Miller were Stark, Peters, DJ, Smith, Cooper, and Justin, as well as Weir, officially serving as a scientific advisor. But the truth was a little more unsettling. Weir did not only want to recover the ship he had built, he wanted to recover a part of himself, and the event horizon knew it. When the Lewis and Clark arrived at Neptune, it found the event horizon floating in silence. From the outside, it looked dead, but from the inside, it was like a frozen metallic cathedral. There was blood in zero gravity, human remains, and signs of a massacre that could not be explained as a technical failure. Kilpack's message, degraded by time, was initially interpreted as a call for help. But when DJ managed to understand the Latin more clearly, the truth began to reveal itself. It was not a rescue call. It was a warning. The previous crew had not left the distress message. They had left a warning telling others to stay away. But the new crew was already inside. Justin was the first to touch the heart of the event horizon. As he approached the gravity drive, the core opened and revealed a black surface, almost like liquid. Then Justin was absorbed into that darkness and returned in a catatonic state. His mind had seen something it could not process. Soon after, he tried to launch himself into space without a suit, desperate not to return to that place. That confirmed that the ship was not simply damaged. It was still connected, and it was still awake. This was when it began to attack this new crew, just as it had attacked the first one. Not with brute force at first, but with memories. Peters saw her son. Miller saw Korik. Weir saw Claire. Each vision was built to open a specific wound in each victim. Because as we have seen, the ship did not invent pain from nothing. It found it inside its victims, amplified it, and turned it into personal torture. The Lewis and Clark was damaged, leaving the crew trapped aboard the event horizon with little oxygen and no clear way out. This was when Miller began to understand that this mission was no longer a rescue operation. The ship must not return to Earth. It had to be destroyed. But Weir fell exactly as the event horizon expected. The vision of Claire broke him. The guilt he had carried since before the first jump became unbearable. Weir stopped seeing the ship as a threat and began to see it as a revelation. To him, the place the event horizon had traveled to was not only a place of horror, it was a place of transcendence, a dimension beyond death. And within it, he saw the possibility of reuniting with Claire. And so, the creator of the portal had become its servant. Weir sabotaged the Lewis and Clark, murdered DJ, and tore out his own eyes as a form of total surrender to Paimon. He was no longer the scientist who had designed the engine. He was an emissary of chaos, a man who had confused hell with salvation because his pain was stronger than his reason. Miller, on the other hand, made the same decision Kilpack had tried to warn them about years earlier. The event horizon must not return. If the ship was a door, it had to be closed. And if it could not be closed, the forward section had to be separated from the gravity core in order to save whoever could still be saved. The final confrontation between Miller and Weir was, in reality, the clash between two responses to trauma. Weir looked at his guilt and surrendered to it, while Miller looked at his own and chose to sacrifice himself so others could survive. Stark, Cooper, and Justin managed to escape in the forward section of the ship. Miller stayed behind and was dragged with Weir into the darkness of the core, temporarily closing the passage. The event horizon was lost once again, and the survivors were left drifting in space until they were rescued. But in this universe, the ending never leaves true peace behind. Stark wakes up and for an instant sees Weir's face among the rescuers. This could be due to trauma, or it could be a hallucination, or it may be a sign that the ship's influence did not disappear completely. That ambiguity summarizes the true horror of Event Horizon. Humanity wanted to conquer space, but it did not understand that the universe could have forbidden zones. It built a machine to bend reality, but never asked what existed between one point and another when space was broken. The Event Horizon did not find a route to the stars. It found a dimension of chaos. And when it returned, it brought with it a spiritual, psychological, and metaphysical infection. And that is where this video ends. I will bring the continuation of this story once the publication of the comic series Event Horizon Inferno is complete, since it is currently still in development and explores the events that take place after everything we have analyzed today. That is where we will discover what happened to the survivors, what the true fate of the ship was, and what new threats emerged after its return from Hell. And with that, we've reached the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell to stay up to date with all my new videos. I also want to give a special shout out to the channel members. Thanks to you and all of our viewers, we can keep diving into these kinds of disturbing and thought-provoking stories. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. And if you want to support the channel and get access to exclusive content, early videos, and other perks, I invite you to become a member. Just click the join button below this video. See you in the next one. Hey, don't go just yet. If you enjoyed this video, I've got another one I think you'll love. Check it out.